Lynched on CTV, proudly brought to you by Christchurch's #1 dining offer, Sequoia 88 at the Redwood Hotel, a food concept unequalled. Good evening to you. Well, tourism in Canterbury took a knock following the quakes, but how are things going now? Tim Hunter, the boss of Christchurch and Canterbury Tourism, is my guest, and Lynched starts right now. Good evening to you. Well, the tourism industry is sending the movers and shakers of Christchurch a strong message. Tourism has to be at the heart of the rebuild. The call comes as the industry works to almost double its revenue by $41 billion by 2025. And the Tourism Industry Association says tourism in Christchurch can't be seen as just an add-on. So to discuss this is Tim Hunter from Christchurch and Canterbury Tourism. Good evening to you, Tim.
Good evening.
Thanks to everyone on the program. I suppose the first obvious question is, you must be almost excited at the fact that small things are coming back to Christchurch, like a full loop of the trams, for example. I mean, who would have thought that's exciting? But it is for many people, but probably yourself, I suppose.
It's great. It's great. No, I think the just getting the tram back last year was really important because, you know, around the world people ask us questions like, how's your cathedral? When's your tram coming back? It is nice to report on those things and say it's a sign that we're getting back to normal.
Well, we'll touch on that awful cathedral debate later in the program, but let's just briefly touch on the trams. It's funny, isn't it, that the trams have become also a symbol of hope and part of the rebuild. And I can't work out why, but they really have, haven't they? Yeah,
no, people love them. You know, not just international visitors, locals as well. And just the enthusiasm of those tramways guys actually, you know, doing them up, tidying them up, putting a new Invercargill tram on the tracks last year, and the restaurant tram coming back. I think that's really exciting because that's something that, you know, all the inbound tour operators really love selling as an evening experience in Christchurch. So,
and not just for tourists, but also for locals. I know that was quite popular with the locals, wasn't it? Because as you were saying to me off air, I mean, you can have a different course meal and see a different view. Nice.
Yes, you can. And
the owners of the tram, they also own the gondola, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yeah.
Now, how is the gondola going? Do you have any facts on how? Because I was concerned that perhaps it would be hard to get the punters back, not just locally but internationally. But how's that going, do you think?
It's going quite well. It's actually nearly back to where it was in 2010, but the whole complexion of it's changed. The local interest in the gondola has gone way up. So, you know, the local numbers have doubled on what they were before the earthquake.
Do you reckon that's because people are taking an active interest in the city, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Yeah, and they want to get up on the hills and see what's happened up there and look at the city, and it's something to do in Christchurch, and also a lot of new residents coming into Christchurch, so it is something new that they can do in the weekends.
Speaking of the Port Hills area, terrible segue, but something else that I got excited about, I'm not particularly a mountain biker myself, but this new international mountain bike park for the Port Hills. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, that is absolutely going ahead, isn't it? Because this money has been invested into it.
Yeah, it's been a lot of work done on the plan over the last 3 years, and government committed $2 million to the project quite recently. But it's huge. It's 120 kilometres of track up there. And for the slightly lazy mountain biker, you can go up in a gondola and just bike down rather than having to bike up.
That's about my level.
So that increases the market size a wee bit.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That is great. Do you know when that's going to open? Because this is something that Christchurch residents, I think, will use. We love our bikes.
No, I think it's a few years away. We don't have I don't have a definitive date, you know, for it as yet. But it is quite important because for international visitors, Christchurch wasn't that well known as being an adrenaline city, and this is going to be a great experience. So it's not just for the locals. I think the backpackers will love it as well.
Well, thank goodness for the gondolas, all I can say. Let's discuss the hotels in Christchurch. You know, I used to even work at the good old Christchurch Heritage Hotel as a porter. It's sad to see that main tower will be gone. I'm thinking it is gone, isn't it? It is gone.
Oh, it's well gone.
But thankfully the old government building, isn't it funny how the older establishments have remained?
Yeah.
But what about other other hotels, is there any interest in getting the likes of the Millennium back, or how are we going with those main core group of hotels that used to?
Well, we used to have 38 hotels. We now have 21 in operation in the city.
Wow.
12 have been demolished completely with no plans to rebuild. And there are 6 that could potentially be rebuilt, but we're just waiting to hear. And I think one of the problems around the square is certainty, and the lack of progress with the cathedral has really depressed investment confidence in that area. And it's, those big hotel owners don't want to move until they can see progress there. People that would normally have come back into the square and created hospitality, because you can see the hospitality industry one of the first to invest and come back. Like last year, we had 72 new bars and restaurants opened in Christchurch. So, there's real confidence to actually invest, but in areas where they feel confident that people will feel happy.
Well, since you brought it up, Tim Hunter, well, let's touch on this blooming cathedral. I mean, I keep changing my mind on this. Part of me wants it rebuilt to what it was. Yeah. The other part of me says just knock it down, let's have some progress in this city. What is the sense from some of your members, and what are they saying in terms of this? Because it's a debate that doesn't seem to end.
Yeah, it's tormented, and it's sort of become a symbol of failure in terms of here's a city that can't agree on things.
Yeah.
And to be here sort of nearly 4 years on from the event, when, I remember 3 days after the February earthquake, Bob Parker, Peter Beck, got on national TV and said, we are going to rebuild the cathedral. And round the world, the money started rolling in, and in fact, the Anglican Church probably could have collected the rebuild plus a bit more over if they'd acted at that time. And it's just a pity that it's turned into such a divisive debate. And I suppose from a tourism point of view, we're a bit agnostic about the solution in terms of, is it a rebuild of a heritage building or is it a new build? We just need a cathedral back in some form, shape or form.
And I suppose that's what local business want. They just want something significant so they know it is going to be worth their while. But unfortunately, Tim, what I'm getting a sense of, this debate ain't over yet.
No, and I think it's interesting, the property gurus in the central city say, look, there is not much confidence to invest around the square until that is solved. And it's not just a church decision, it's actually a city issue. It's actually holding us back.
But the irony of all this, the courts have made a decision, and for better or worse, the courts have come back, I think, 2 times now and said they've allowed the church to deconstruct it. But I have to give it to Jim Anderson. If there's one thing he is, he's tenacious, isn't he?
He is, but I think there comes a time and there needs to be some compromise.
Well, it was very delicately said, nicely said. Before we take a break, in terms of the hotel and the motel industry, perhaps no surprises. Whenever I drive down Rickenham Road, it's quite nice to see, I suppose, no vacancy. Yeah. I suppose it's fair to say those motels must be doing a roaring trade. Have they sort of taken over some of the hotel hospitality?
They have, particularly in the domestic market. Domestic, accommodation, in terms of business people coming to Christchurch, is really, really strong. So there isn't enough hotel capacity to take care of that. So, a lot of that's gone into motels. A lot of motels have changed hands. They've been making good money, and so they've sold on to new owners. Yeah. But we seriously need more capacity, in all areas. Backpacker is an acute one, particularly in the summer months. Hotel and also in motels.
So why is it then that the bars and restaurants coming back, but the hotels are a lot slower, do you think?
Well, I think the bars and restaurants got a huge local market, quite a vibrant one. So they don't just rely on people visiting the city. They rely on people. People are interested in going into the city. They want to go back. They want to go places at night to be entertained. So that's just a natural thing. But we've coped for most of the year. We coped really well in the last 12 months. But I think next summer we're going to hit a bit of a wall if we don't build some more accommodation. And it's because the long-haul travel markets are recovering quite quickly now. The one that we've struggled with a bit is Australia. And Australia is interesting because the business market from Australia is strong. The visiting friends and relatives market is very strong. But the holiday market absolutely collapsed in 2011. And we've run a lot of campaigns in Australia to get that back. But at the same time we've been running campaigns, airlines have been taking air seats into Christchurch and giving them to Queenstown. So they've taken 136,000 seats out of Christchurch and given Queenstown 150,000.
You're saying come back.
Come back, and they'll come back. They're coming back to Queenstown, not Christchurch.
Well, I want to talk more about that later. We do need to take a break. When we return, we'll discuss that old chestnut of mine, the convention centre. Stay with us. Welcome back to Lynch. My guest tonight is Tim Hunter from Christchurch and Canterbury Tourism. Tim, the old Chestnut Convention Centre. You know, it was one of my pet hates at first because I was always concerned there was no business case. That hasn't changed, but I'm softening. I'm softening now. There's no ratepayer money involved in this, although taxpayer money.
Yeah.
Where are we at with that? And I'm not sure if you saw. Of course, you watched Lynched religiously. I know this. Gary Moore said a convention centre is a dated concept and it's unnecessary. What is your response to that?
Well, I'm not sure if he said that when he was the mayor, but put it this way.
No, he wouldn't.
When we had a convention centre, I didn't hear anyone grizzling about it. And the thing for tourism, I suppose, it brings a lot of high-value tourism into the city during the months of the year where we really need it. We're overrun with visitors from Northern Hemisphere markets in the summer, but in the autumn, spring and winter, we've got empty hotels, we've got restaurants that don't do a full trade. Having large conferences here was really helpful. And actually, Christchurch was incredibly successful at it. We had a quarter share of the whole New Zealand conference market before this all happened.
Do you worry that with the Queenstown Convention Centre, the Wellington Convention Centre, a massive one for Auckland, do you think we as a city run the risk of just having too many, even as a country?
No, I don't. I mean, look at Australia. It's 7 larger convention centres in Australia than we're going to have. Well, in terms of larger than what we're going to build in Christchurch. So we're at the small end. And our domestic conferencing market's really strong. And we actually have a need for a convention centre that can also do trade exhibitions and consumer shows. And I think when it starts doing consumer shows where people go to the boat show, the car show, the holiday show, they actually might start to like the place because, we're trying to build something in Christchurch that doesn't just run one event at a time. It's actually big enough to run 2 events of 500 or 700 people at the same time. And that's going to improve the productivity over the one that we had before.
There was that concern that if you have a convention centre, it needs to be multi-purpose, it needs to be available to the public, so the public that end up paying for this thing, it's viable, it's commercially viable.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that, though? It's all very well to have a convention, but we've got to make sure that it's commercially viable for the public, though.
Well, I have to be brutally honest with you here. Around the world, convention centres don't produce a great return on investment. And it's because the people that invest in them see them as a civic asset. It brings people to their city that spend money more broadly. And when I say more broadly, we're talking here, if we do 90 events a year in the convention centre, it will put $120 million into the Christchurch economy.
I'm glad you're honest about that. So you do accept, though, that large convention centres are loss-making.
The reason that private sector don't own them is that they, after paying depreciation and interest, they probably only come out with a 2 or 3% return on capital. And that's why civic authorities have tended to, they've looked at the larger economic benefit. It's not just that, it's about jobs. And for us, it's particularly making our hotel industry a bit more viable because it's got all this winter business that it would otherwise not have if we didn't have the convention centre.
I'm glad you were honest about the economics of it. So I think the argument needed to be more, I think the government at one stage was going on how saying it's going to be the economic driver, but they weren't saying, well, actually, as you've just said, they aren't money-making things on their own.
I think what worried me about the debate was what I was hearing is that people in Christchurch were saying, we'd rather have our homes fixed than a convention centre. And I don't think that was ever the issue about the money's available for A or B. It's actually, we should do both. We need to fix houses quickly, but we also need to think about, after all the rebuild, what's going to run our city economy.
You're right to say that, because I think the argument is dead in the water when people say, what about the roads being fixed? I mean, you can make that argument about anything, but once the roads are fixed, if you've got nowhere to go, then why have a city?
Well, people need jobs, and university students need work at night, in bars and restaurants, and in the convention centre, like when you've got a major event on, it's probably employing 400 people a night. That's a lot of jobs across the year when it's used for probably 190, 200 nights a year.
We're fastly running out of time, sadly, but I want to touch on this push to get the Chinese market, that lucrative Chinese dollar to Christchurch. I understand that Canterbury Tourism and some other operators went over to China. How did you get on, and why is that market so important?
Well, it's important because it's one of our biggest growth opportunities. It's not just China; it's also Southeast Asia. But
and here's a photo here of what?
This was an event in June where all of the tourism, regional tourism operations in the South Island went up to China with some of our high-profile tourism companies, and 2 days of promotion. First to all the salespeople for China Southern Airlines, which is flying double daily into Auckland, and we'd like to get them into Christchurch. And the second day was travel agents right across southern China.
And that's you in your grass skirt, right?
That's me in my grass skirt. And we were really showing them how cool the South Island was and why, you know, a service into Christchurch would work. And it's about building confidence by the people that make the key decisions at China Southern.
You think it'll be successful?
I think we will. It's going to take time, but it's really interesting. Already 35% of Chinese visitor nights are in the South Island, and it's growing really rapidly. It's growing much faster than the North Island. And we're now seeing Chinese people self-drive. It's a scary thought, but they're...
What do you mean self-drive?
Well, they're driving their own cars around on a different side of the road than they drive in China.
Right.
But they're getting into the nooks and crannies of the South Island. They're spending a lot of money. And you know, they're not on shopping tours, they're real tourists, and they're adding something to our economy.
Got to take a break soon, but just want to briefly touch on the central city. I mean, I love seeing physical progress. I get excited when there's new buildings going up, I'm sure you do too. But the feedback I get from some of my friends from Auckland that come down and stay at the Novotel Hotel in the middle of the city is, not much here, it's a bit of an embarrassment, isn't it? Where's everything? Which probably isn't really that true, but perception is reality for them. You know, much of Central City still looks like a bit of a ghost town. Does that concern the tourism industry? Because first impressions count, don't they?
Yeah, they do. We did some extensive research last summer. We interviewed 2,000 people, and we saw some huge differences in view. A lot of young tourists, and particularly from Western countries, think it's quite edgy and interesting. All the broken stuff, but the new, the resilient.
Gap filler stuff,
gap
it's trendy,
filler,
isn't it?
C1 having burgers served to you at 120 kilometres an hour in a tube.
I don't get that, but whatever. Good bit of good fun, I suppose.
And you know, New Regent Street being up and running.
But things could be faster. I mean, clearing up some of those public spaces with more grass, for example, just the smallest things I think will make a difference, won't it?
Yeah, and tidying up pavements and resealing streets. I mean,
don't get me started.
All we would like to see is a couple of blocks of normality in that central city. It would make a huge difference.
Wouldn't
to
that
the
be
tourism
nice?
industry.
I completely agree with you. Got to take a break. When we return, we'll briefly touch on the cruise market for Akaroa. Bring it to Littleton, I say. And what is the future of tourism in Christchurch? Stay with us. Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guest tonight is Tim Hunter from the Christchurch and Canterbury Tourism. Tim, let's touch on Littleton Port. The Tourism Association has some concerns. They want to bring those cruise ships, those massive cruise ships, to Littleton. Is Akaroa coping okay, or do you think that, is the problem there it's just too far away from the hub of Christchurch?
Yeah, Akaroa's done a great job in terms of being host to cruise passengers, and cruise passengers love it. They really like the sort of boutique French settlement when they come ashore. But the issue for the broader tourism industry is that Christchurch is a bit far away. It's a windy trip in a bus. We are not getting as many people doing some of those high ticket items in terms of high country tours, North Canterbury wine tours, Transalpine train trip. So having them in Littleton was certainly cashes the industry up in a bigger way.
The problem is the port says it's got no money. What do you say?
They're not saying they've got no money. They're saying, look, we can build you a cruise wharf. You know, we've got 25 million that we can put against it, because that would equate to the sort of revenue that we could get out of that wharf facility, because they don't have another need for that configuration of wharf in Littleton. But you know, they're saying the real cost of building that wharf is 45 million, and they've said to us, if you can find $20 million, you can have a cruise wharf. If you can't find $20 million, then we won't be building one. And that's the problem, because if you look at the benefit of Littleton, and it's not just about bringing cruise boats into Littleton versus Akaroa, we've got these very large cruise ships coming onto the Australian New Zealand circuit. And they can't use Akaroa Harbour because of the draft and because of the tendering ashore. It's simply with 3,500 people just takes too long to do that. So we're missing out on those big cruise ships, and each year goes by we'll miss out on more and more because the smaller ships will be replaced with the larger ships.
But would there be enough cruise ships to sustain the wharf? Would there be enough coming through to eventually get your money back, do you think?
Not quite, nearly, but I think the issue is that we've looked at the difference between keeping it at Akaroa and putting it in, using both Akaroa and Littleton, and over 10 years it's about $100 million better off for the industry, whereas in fact what we're trying to find is $20 million to pay for the difference between what LPC can afford and it's the shortfall on their investment. So, that's a difficult argument, because if you tried to recover it from cruise passengers, they would have to increase their port fees by 50%, and the cruise lines just won't accept that. So we've really got to sit down around the table and see if we can find a solution.
We're nearly out of time, but looking ahead to the future of Christchurch, I'm concerned that occasionally we've got planners inside the council that lack vision. And I point to, I'm not sure if you're aware of this case, the Majestic Church Group. They want to build a beautiful new auditorium, have a cafeteria, apartments on, I think it was Cranford Square. Some boring old planner said, nope, sorry, it's outside the zone. Does that mentality, I suppose, worry you that Christchurch needs a vision? Christchurch needs to be alive. Christchurch cannot be the same as it was last time. The central city, as many would say, was probably dying before the quakes. We need to sort of ramp things up just another notch, don't we? And does it concern you that sometimes the old school mentality creeps back into Christchurch, back into that council and says, oh, you're not having that? No.
Well,
do you know what I mean?
We need some roles, but we also need some flexibility just because of the size, the massive effect it's had on the city. But the thing that worries me is we need better definition of what sort of city we're going to be. And I think in terms of the green city, we're always, trump card on that. The Botanic Gardens, 1 million visitors a year go through that. Hagley Park, 4th largest urban park in the world, gorgeous park.
We've got a green city.
Avon River Park, well, if they get on and build it, it'll be a wonderful thing. Yes. But that's great. But are we really going to build a green city? Because if we could... You're
talking about these little compact
boxes? Well, no, I'm talking about environmentally friendly buildings, right. And, in terms of, we'd have a great story to tell, an outstanding story to tell.
We just got to tell them to get on with it, though.
Yes.
How do we do that, though? I'm sick of seeing the mess in central Christchurch.
It's not great.
Can you give your friends at Sarah a call, please? And tell them?
Well, as we said 4 years ago, just give us 4 blocks of normality in the tourism industry would be
Wouldn't
happy.
That be nice?
Yeah.
Look, we're nearly out of time, but what do you see as some of the trump cards of Christchurch coming up for the tourism industry? Are things like the Cricket World Cup, is that going to be amazing? The junior soccer, the fact we're getting more international artists coming to Christchurch. Are some of these things starting to look better, do you think?
Yep. Being able to cope with major events is really important to just signal to other cities in the world that we can do it. We've finally seen some confidence this summer from the airlines. Singapore Airlines have put on 24 extra flights into Christchurch. On the Tasman, we've got 11% more seats, which is going to make marketing in Australia a whole lot easier. Just making progress with the convention centre has just increased the level of investment interest in accommodation. Having those basic capabilities restored is really, really important to growth. So we're predicting 5 years about a 48% growth in international arrivals and about 22% in domestic. So
hopefully by the 4 years we'll have a more of a city, and that will be nice for everybody. So you and I don't have city envy when we go across to...
We have a lot of city envy when we go out. Yeah.
Tim Hunter, we're out of time. Very nice to meet you, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you. Yeah.
And that is our show this week. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great night. Lynched on CTV was proudly brought to you by Christchurch's #1 dining offer, Sequoia 88, at the Redwood Hotel, a food concept unequalled.